Blockchance Online Live is an online live-streamed broadcast talk show about blockchain, AI, and green technology. We bring inspiring speakers and innovative thought leaders together to talk about current and future developments within these exciting new fields. Join us to learn how we can use these disruptive technologies to better aid humanity and strive for a fair, secure, humane, and positive future. Get involved in our community and share your opinions and ideas. Together, we can make a difference.
Good evening and greetings to all of you from wherever you are listening in. Welcome to Blockchance Online Live. My name is Tobias and I'm hosting today's show. Today, we're going to talk about some important issues: trust and competitiveness. These are the two principles of just any economy, and the AI economy in particular. However, they've been deteriorating in the AI economy. Large platforms that are shaping the AI economy tend to concentrate, overuse, and abuse data that they are collecting. At the same time, startups oftentimes have difficulties to access sufficiently large amounts of data in order to train the AI algorithms. So what can we do about it? Are data marketplaces the answer? This is something that I want to discuss with my guests today. However, before we start, some quick words about the show. As a frequent guest to the show, you might know that there's a blockchain track and an AI track. The AI track is co-sponsored by AI.Hamburg. And we want to invite you to see it as an open platform and ask your questions today, either in the live chat. You should see the link below on the screen, or in the Telegram group. Now, as I've mentioned, the topic today are data marketplaces. But what are data marketplaces, you might ask? Well, in their purest form, they offer a transaction platform for data creators to sell their data, so to monetize their data, and for data buyers to source data far more effortlessly. However, I'm probably not the best to explain that. My distinguished guest, Olaf Groth, however, is. Olaf Groth is CEO at Cambrian Futures. I should say also my business partner at Cambrian. And he is professor for innovation, strategy, and the economy at HULT International Business School and UC Berkeley. Don't be fooled by his American accent. He actually hails from Germany, and he has family nearby Hamburg. However, today he is joining us from San Francisco. Good morning, Olaf. Good morning, over to you.
Thank you, Tobias, and hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And yes, I am a German immigrant to the United States, and I've been here for about 30 years. It's been a good ride, but I'm equally happy to always come back to Germany and be a guest on shows like yours, Tobias. So thank you very much to you and Blockchance for having me.
Thank you so much, Olaf. Let's start right away. In recent months, we have seen a lot of headlines related to the AI economy. Right? Google is currently being sued by the Department of Justice over their control of data. The China Central Bank is trying to take control over Ant Group, the fintech subsidiary of Alibaba. And the European Union is launching data policies to regulate the AI economy, now mainly on a monthly basis. That makes me really wondering, is there a red thread in all of this? And what is your assessment of the AI economy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tobias. So look, really what's at stake here is a matter of power, right? Or as we say in German, Macht, right? Machtbeziehungen, Machtgeflechte. The AI economy essentially determines, decisions and recommendations and flows in the economy, both of money as well as attention, of course, and at the root of all of this is data. And so we're really seeing a complete rejiggering of the current economy. If you imagine the reigning heights of the global economy up until about 2005 or so, were the old established industries like oil and gas and engineering and automotive and banking and so forth, maybe some heavy engineering thrown in for good measure. All of that has changed. The top 8 companies in the world by market capitalization are no longer those commanding heights of the old industries, but rather the commanding heights of the new industries, and they're all global platforms. And these are usually the 5 global American platforms and then 3, maybe 4 Chinese platforms, notably with very few, if any, European platforms thrown in. And so we're seeing a complete migration of power in the economy over to the digital platforms. And of course, at the core of those platforms is artificial intelligence to make sense of all the data that is being transacted. And those who have ownership of and who have design control over the artificial intelligence and of course, who accumulate the greatest data pools are the ones who are the most powerful in society. And there is a concentration, it is almost an oligopolistic concentration in the economy because we're also dependent on these platforms. And of course, there's lots of advantages to this. We want greater access, we want greater affordability, we want one-stop shopping. So we want integration. We don't want more complexity in our lives. And at the same time, we have to face the power question here, both on an individual level in terms of my data, my life, and how I am being assessed, as well as industrially, economically. So that's really what's at stake in this new era. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, Olaf. Thank you very much for that. It makes me wondering, what kind of paradigm shift do data marketplaces promise in this environment? What would they change in the AI economy if they would be built?
Well, look, excuse me. Data is, some people say data is the new oil, but that's really not a very good metaphor because oil is it's a hard physical resource with diminishing returns, right? The more you use, the less you have, and you can't reuse it. Whereas, data, you can actually reuse in various constellations. It's almost a little bit more like sunlight, if you want an energy analogy, but really even that is a very imperfect analogy. There's really very few assets out there that have the same properties as data. But the one thing that is true about this analogy of, whether it's oil or energy, is that data is the fuel on which everything else runs. The modern economy, the platform economy, even just sort of regular digital business models, even analog digital hybrid business models all run on that fuel, on data. And so it is necessary that we trade that fuel transparently. But the problem is, right now, there is no transparency. Right now, our data, whether it's individual consumer data or whether it's enterprise data, is being traded behind closed doors. Yes, it's true, I'm signing user agreements that have privacy clauses in them. But usually, if I want access to a platform, I have to agree to leave all my data as I leave footprints on these platforms. Well, so essentially, I'm spreading my data around. I don't know where the data is going. And we do know it is being traded by platforms with other companies around the economy to different degrees in different countries, arguably. A little bit different in the United States from Europe and China, for instance. But really the problem remains that there is no transparency. Why don't we create a data market that offers this transparency so people can see, okay, my data packages of this nature and of that nature are being demanded by a number of different entities in the market, and this is how prices are being built and arrived at. And I have transparency about who gets my data. Right now, it's all backroom dealing between the big global platforms and the analytics companies or the advertising companies in the background. And so this is where it gets murky, because we can't get appropriate value for our data if it's this intransparent, right? So that's really why it matters.
Now that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I've seen on LinkedIn, you mentioned the number of 3 trillion, right? 3 trillion is the value of the global data economy. So it is an asset class in itself, one should actually say, and an asset class deserves kind of a trading place, one could argue. Now, we've been talking, or we started to talk a little bit about it, right? It's difficult to price data because it is different to a liter of oil, for example, right? A liter of oil, there's scarcity, and hence it's easy to come to a price. Now, against this background, what kind of features would be required to build a functioning data marketplace, right? And how do you actually manage to arrive at a price point for something that you can copy 1,000 times without it losing actually any quality?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Tobias. Look, I mean, the problem with today's data paradigm is that because we're spreading it around so liberally, data is really ubiquitously just sort of spread all over the economy. But you cannot value, and you rightly call this, a new asset class. You cannot value the data unless you start to make it scarce, right? We have a similar problem with water around the global economy, right? Where we really technically need to be innovating on water conservation, water usage type technologies and business models, but we can't because, for understandable reasons, we are, we're not pricing water. We are, in fact, subsidizing it, or in many regions of the world, making it free. But if that happens, and we know why, and there's good reason, because it's an asset that we all need to live, and no matter how much money you have, you ought to have access to water very clearly. But it makes it very hard to price water because entrepreneurs and businesses don't know how to wrap a business model around water. And it's the same with data. If we are not making certain types of data, and the emphasis is on certain types of data, more scarce, and are able to assess concrete value on those scarce data packages, then we can't price it and we cannot trade it, right? And so we do have to introduce some scarcity there. And so if you want to do that, then what you have to make happen is you have to start to secure your data footprint as you leave traces around the digital sphere, right? The matrix, or whatever you want to call it. You need to be able to say, and this is, by the way, the same for a consumer, for any private person looking at a news website or e-commerce website, as it is for an enterprise, because enterprises too should be able to protect their data, because their data footprints are a competitive asset, right? If I can triangulate employees as they roam on the web, I can start to make sense of what the company is doing or is about to do. So that too is sensitive. It's not just a consumer issue, it's an enterprise, it's a business issue as well. So what do we do about it? Well, we have to ring fence the data, okay? And that means we have to secure it. And you could see, and we've been conceptualizing a solution called the bouncer bot, right? The Türsteher bot, right? Which I'm already giving it a person's identity, which will look over your shoulder, give your data footprint a watermark, okay? And with that watermark, you can then sort of freely ring fence the data and say, look, as I am going to this website and that website, I'm leaving data footprints. These are my data footprints. And parts of those footprints I may want to give away because I realize I'm on your website and I want to pay with my data, okay? Part of that I want to protect and keep to myself, maybe because it is particularly sensitive to me, right? So we need to protect it, and then we can start to put these data packages into a trading mechanism that, first of all, starts with a price assessment. Now, that's really hard to do. I don't know what my data is worth. There are some internet companies that say that my personally identifiable data is, for 1,000 people is, I don't know, 5 cents or a fraction of a cent. There's different numbers out there, but it's an order of magnitude different from the average consumer perception, which says, oh no, it's $36. Well, how in the world am I going to close the gap between less than 5 cents and $36? Well, the easiest process is a bidding process, an automated bidding process where people can start to bid for your data, the data that you don't deem private, okay, and let them bid for it to close the gap. And as we arrive at some initial indication of a market equilibrium, we can then start a regular trading mechanism like you have on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, any stock exchange really, where the buyer and the provider or supplier of data can find each other in the market in split seconds. And of course, all of that with DeFi, decentralized finance, 2.0 will be automated and diffused. So this doesn't have to necessarily be one centralized marketplace like a New York Stock Exchange. This could be diffused exchanges, coordinated by a central oversight authority. So that's the institutional framework and the processes that I think we need.
Now, this is really fascinating. And I think there's so many rich information in there that I would like to unpack it a little bit. So what I'm hearing from you is essentially you need to create scarcity of data in order to be able to negotiate the value of it. Now, it kind of sounds like that you can create scarcity by creating effective privacy regulation or effective tools that allow you to control and own your data. Because once you do that, I heard you saying, then you actually have control over it, hence you make it scarce, and hence you can negotiate the value. Does that reflect?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Tobias. So the solution I described, right, which we had dubbed the bouncer bot, right, it's a private, a market-based solution, not a regulation. And this creates scarcity by putting a ring fence around your data, right? So if you go to a website, it could be a news website that takes all kinds of data of yours that goes way beyond just knowing what articles you click on, okay? It can triangulate, trackers on their websites can triangulate you all throughout your day and make sense of your personality profile, okay? So I might create scarcity of that data footprint by watermarking my data and saying to the business on the other side, I want to give you some of my data as it pertains to your website, but I want to be cut in when you're selling my data about my personal profile to another company out there, okay? So that's creating scarcity right there. Now, what you're essentially doing is you're saying, I'm going head to head with the user agreement that the digital service provider, whether it's news or e-commerce or a large digital social network, they have me sign user agreements, right? So in essence, what we're saying is, yes, I may have clicked yes, but I'm also telling you, I'm now putting my own legal mechanism against that, and I want to start to negotiate, okay? That's a private solution to generating a little bit of leverage to start the conversation, okay? Why would we do that? Because Tobias, your definition of privacy and that of all the people joining us online here, let's just say there's, I don't know, a couple of hundred, probably have a couple of hundred and then some definitions of what privacy means to them. I cannot really fully regulate that, right? Because, I don't know, maybe you are more or less private than I am. And if I just have one blanket regulation, I will essentially not let you do what you want to do in the digital sphere, okay? So now, in order, however, to start this, there is one problem. And the problem is that consumers who employ a private market-based solution like the one I've been describing don't have a lot of power vis-a-vis the digital platforms, right? Because we're just a few people. Make that a few thousand people. Make that a few 100,000 people. That is still a small percentage compared to the billions of people on the global platforms, right? And so we lack leverage, okay? We can create a little bit of leverage through the private-based market solution, but we also need the government to step in and say, you know what? We are going to make sure that consumers, each individual consumer, has the legal right to do what I just described, okay? That's when global digital companies take it very seriously, because all of a sudden, there is a potential of billions of people saying, hey, you know what? I like this kind of solution. And you, digital platform, please start to negotiate with me. Okay. So we do need regulation, but we need regulation that enables private sector solutions to do justice to your individual notion of privacy, rather than saying, you know what? I'm going to treat all of your data the same across all of my citizens. Okay. So in that sense, I very much applaud Europe's GDPR, okay, the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union that has had extraterritorial effects. It sent a great signal that we need to protect corporate and enterprise data and personal individual data. And it is also too broad and too general. And it puts a halt on much needed experimentation that entrepreneurs need, right? I teach innovation. I teach many, and I work with clients who are entrepreneurs that want to experiment with data business models. We need these entrepreneurs to have sandboxes, right? Sandkästen, right? In which they can experiment safely with data, and they need to be allowed to. So a regulation like the GDPR really needs to create room for those sandboxes, and it needs to regulate data in a more verticalized manner, because healthcare data is very different from retail data. I'm not saying that there is no sensitivity in retail data, but clearly there's less sensitivity than your health data, right? And so we need to be much more verticalized and application specific in our data regulations. But we do need both. We need the regulations, and we need the market-based private solutions.
This brings me to another point here, right? I mean, you already talked about the need for regulation on the one hand to create a conducive environment for such innovations to prosper, but then you also said the market needs to have free space in order to let entrepreneurial ideas grow. In Europe in particular, we also had a number of other approaches to promoting a better data allocation in the economy. And we've been pushing for open source approaches, right? Open data sources, open data pools, for example, as one approach. But then also in the US, we see other approaches, as for example, the data dividends that the Californian governor is championing. And then from Microsoft, Jaron Lanier, we see an idea coming out that is called data labor unions, or dignity data, right, which basically foresees a kind of labor union that negotiates the value of data on behalf of the data creators, so you and me. Now, against this background, or in comparison to those different approaches, how would you say data marketplaces compare, and what are their advantages or disadvantages in actually making data more accessible while at the same time assuring privacy?
Yeah, look, I mean, the advantage is that I create a transaction environment where there is many buyers and many sellers meeting each other, okay, with, to buy very different, very disparate data packages, okay, from people who have very different definitions of privacy, right? Yes, there needs to be a base definition on basic human dignity, basic protections around cybersecurity, healthcare privacy, etc. But on top of that is a whole world of data in which we as individuals and enterprises need to be able to customize what they put into the market. Neither the data dividend that Governor Newsom proposed, nor Jaron's MIDS concept, the data labor union analog, really do that justice, right? Because the governor's data dividend could just be designed to be yet another tax, okay? And where does that tax go? We don't know, but it is fair to say it will likely not end up in the hands of those who are giving their personal data. Ideally, it would be used to educate students and to help elderly people into the digital economy, okay? But we don't even know that. So there is no flow through to the people whose lives are being analyzed on the web, right? And I don't think that's particularly fair to those people. It's just another way to tax. And we need to make sure that we, if we do that, we use the taxes for the right things. But in general, I'm not a big fan of just layering tax upon tax upon tax upon tax, okay? So we need to be careful with that. Jaron is a personal friend, and as everybody knows, a super brilliant man, I think is going in the right direction in that we do need some kind of, I won't call it central, but some kind of common or joint oversight institution, okay? And whether that is an institution that is like ICANN, for instance, that's a nonprofit, maybe using blockchain or other types of digital ledger technologies in a more decentralized fashion, but somebody needs to have some oversight, some view of the landscape, some high-level image of what's going on around the country, the society, the economy, globally. How is data flowing? Because we've seen with money what happens when we don't have any global coordination, right? And data is even more fungible and even more fluid and liquid than money. So we do need that. I'm not sure that me giving all of my data to a digital data labor union is, however, the right way to go, right? Because again, I cannot determine how my privacy sensitivity and my identity, which is caught up in all of this. Let us not forget that. This is the era of identity politics. We do want to make sure people get seen, right? People get seen for who they are, and they get a right to say, this is who I am. I do not want this to be sold, but I'm okay selling this. A data labor union is not going to be able to do that, at least not the way I'm reading it currently. But I think directionally, we do need some kind of institution that has it's almost like a radar-like understanding of what's happening around the data economy, and makes sure that we have governance in place, okay? That we, and frankly, that's why we have the SEC in the United States overseeing securities, right, and transactions. We need something like that that will make sure that things are happening legally and ethically, okay? But that doesn't mean that I have to go through a data labor union. So that's my 5 cents on this. Now, data markets are very tough to do, okay? And here is why. So for one, because these assets have great variance, right? It's not like saying, okay, I'm going to buy a share or 5,000 shares of BMW versus Toyota, right? It's a pretty clear thing what BMW is and does and what Toyota is and does, okay? But your data packages could be very individualized. So we, have never traded assets that were this diverse. And so that's where we need AI. In future, we will have quantum computing to help with that as well. But that is why it is difficult to put in place. And then, of course, people also need to be incentivized. They need to be incentivized to add their data into the market. They need to be privacy assured. So governance is very important. And we need to educate them on how to do this, right? Think about this. Why is it that under GDPR, only 3% of all people ever claim their data back from Google or from any other platform? It's what we call the privacy paradox. Well, it's because they're scared to make a mistake. they're concerned that Google will switch them off, or they just don't know how to do it and don't have time in their days, because let's face it, not everybody is a data aficionado, right? Not everybody is a data scientist. Not everybody wants to be technical or mathematical or fiddle with the internet when they have families to take care of and work to be done, etc., right? So we need to educate people and make it easy. So those are 3 hurdles. We think we can crack them to a much more equitable data market structure, but it will take some work, and it will take collaboration with regulators to put that in place.
Let's talk about that in just a second. We also got some questions here already from the audience that go exactly into this direction. However, we are already midway through the show, and hence it's already time for a very short break. If you stick around, you have the chance to win a ticket to the Blockchance conference, which is happening on December 8th till December 10th here in Hamburg. You can win a ticket if you subscribe to the newsletter, and then they will raffle it and they will pull the winner. Now, if you want to see what you can expect in Hamburg, check out this video.
Where are we heading? Who owns your data? Who owns your money? Your future. We are approaching a new dawn. Blockchain technology. Artificial intelligence. Sustainability. Be a part of the evolution. Hamburg, Germany, 2021. Blockchance 2021.
Hello and back again. We are talking today about data marketplaces, and our guest is Olaf Groth, who is joining us from California. And we just got talking about how data marketplaces need to be designed, what their problems are, but also what their potentials are. And one of the last points, Olaf, that you mentioned was, again, the importance of regulations such as GDPR. And actually, we've got a question from a guest, from Daniel Albrecht. He's asking whether or not legislative policies are necessary to create a well-functioning internal market for AI systems, right? Something that the European Union is currently pretty strong about and pushing forward on many fronts. Now, I would like to tie that question with another one, because you mentioned already before that there's a difference between B2C marketplaces and B2B marketplaces. Now, one of the initiatives of the European Union are data spaces, in which they want to incentivize companies to also share their data, for example, in the area of healthcare or in the area of climate change, right? They're topic related. That kind of makes me wondering, what kind of rationale would you require in order to make such policies fly? Are the incentives the same, or should the incentives be the same as in a B2C data marketplace, or do we need to think it differently? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think, look, in the B2C marketplace, what we need is, clearly we need that privacy assurance, right? And so part of that can be assured through, watermarking and licensing arrangements, putting general public license keys into the data that is stored on a blockchain and things like that. When you're going out there, there's still into a consumer market, there still needs to be an authority that understands, is part of your data sensitive to you and to society, right? So healthcare data, for instance, are you being reckless, right, with your data? So, I don't know what that could be, but, you are freely spreading your drug consumption patterns across the market, and or maybe sensitive information that has cybersecurity repercussions. There needs to be a central authority that does put privacy safeguards in place. You need that for corporations as well, but for corporations, something else is really important, and that is liability. Okay, if I am going to work with a chief data officer or chief information or chief information security officer, CISO, then what's important for them is to know, if I put data out there, that I am protected from yes, cybersecurity relevant threats, but also liability, legal liability, so that I can experiment with this market structure and not get sued. And under GDPR, for instance, and a little bit similar under California's CCPA, the Consumer Protection Act that was passed and enacted last year, that I don't get fined billions of dollars. Okay, so again, the sandboxes are a little bit different in that I need to enable business model and trading experimentation in safe ways in these sandboxes.
Yeah, that I can see that. So in B2C marketplaces, we kind of talk about privacy as a key feature for defining the value of data, obviously always in combination with scarcity. And from what I'm hearing now is in B2B data marketplaces, you talk about the value of a competitive edge, or the liability kind of data exposure can imply to you. But on the other hand, I think also here we're going to talk about scarcity too, right? Because this is in the end still key if you want to find a price point for the data that you put on the marketplace. Now, the idea of data marketplaces has been around for quite some time, right? However, only since about like 1, 2, or 3 years, we are seeing business models appearing, right? And startups actually tackling it. Why do you think that is? Is it because our perception of privacy and our understanding of the economy has changed? Or is it because technological progress has made it possible and we weren't able to implement such complex business models before? Why do you think it has taken us so long to actually start innovating in this space?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's data. Data has had a dirty connotation, and that's very unfortunate, because data, like we are saying, is the fuel of the AI-driven, what we call cognitive economy, right? The automation of certain processes around the economy. So it's an immensely promising, not just $3 trillion, but potentially $6 trillion opportunity, because we also have to clean up existing data, and that's yet another $3 trillion, right? So lots and lots of potential there. But it's had a dirty connotation because of that privacy notion, meaning the notion of privacy violation, right? And that's one that we need to fix. And I do want to hark back to a point you just made, Tobias, very nicely, right? Which is, there is a competitive element to this for companies. And this is why they haven't really touched it as much, right? Because it has the connotation of it being risky, right? Privacy violations, competitive intelligence, cybersecurity threats. We've always had this notion that we needed to see data as something we absolutely all the time need to protect, build a wall around, but we have essentially imprisoned data, okay? We've put it on some lonely island and have said, we must not touch that, right? And so we are caught between a rock and a hard place. We want to trade, but we also don't want to be unethical, okay, by violating privacy and agency, or by not safeguarding or mitigating bias in data. But we also want to use it as a fuel, and that's really, really hard, fine line to walk. And like I say, the regulation we have in place sent a great signal, but it's not making life easier for a lot of companies that are saying, okay, but then how do I experiment with new data business models? I have companies in my purview, clients and companies that I dialogue with, that I've said literally, and we're talking board members, right, saying, look, I want to experiment more with data. These are European companies, but my lawyers won't let me because they're afraid to get slapped with fines, right? Because the immediate instinct, of course, and understandably, is of a corporate lawyer is to protect the company, okay? And you should, but we also need to make sure that we get to grow, because otherwise, I have to tell you, countries that don't manage that fine line, including regions like Europe, will die a lonely analog death. And that's not what any of us want, right? So that's why it's been so hard to put these data markets together, and that's why it's going to be hard to put these data spaces together, right? That's reason number one. Reason number two is that there are lots of really great ideas. I went through the new European data regulation, went through the German one as well. A lot of great concepts and programmatic steps. And we also know everything in Europe takes a long time, without any disrespect. It's a continent that is very thorough, that protects first and then tries to experiment through the little cracks in the wall, okay? Whereas in America and in China, and I'm not defending it, but I'm just pointing out the reality, China is the fastest country on earth when it comes to experimenting with data, okay? And so while we deliberate and talk some more, and then we make a small decision, and then that gets taken apart, and then we talk some more, and and we talk ourselves to death, okay? Meanwhile, the Chinese 1.5 billion are experimenting very quickly, safeguarded by a obviously surveillance-oriented, partially oppressive government. But data trading like it happens between companies behind closed doors in the United States doesn't happen in China as much. Okay, but they're much faster, because with underneath that government threat is a lot of freedom to experiment with data really quickly. Then you add to the 1.5 billion another billion or two in the Belt and Road Initiative. Understand this is 100 countries around the world, 50% of global GDP. People have signed on to the Belt and Road, and they're now overlaying a digital Silk Road on top of that. Okay, and so there is a lot of fast reactions out there, and Europe is very thorough. I applaud the respect for the individual, and I have to tell you, my biggest doubt is the speed. We could be debating ourselves to death, and putting these very interesting concepts in these strategies into place is bound to take a lot of time, because and this is the other thing, having the concepts in place and having Europe-wide laws and regulations is one thing, but that's not society, that's not business, that's not the economy. They need to adjust, and they can only adjust if the administrative procedures are in place to let them build, experiment, transact. And those administrative procedures are very disparate across Europe. I mean, it's even in the new data strategies that I just went through. The fact that we respect the high degree of diversity amidst European member countries when it comes to such administrative processes. Well, I'm sorry, but that's the death knell for any entrepreneur that wants to come to Europe to take advantage of the 500 million people market if I have to go after 24 plus administrative procedures around Europe, right? And that's why entrepreneurs then migrate off to America or to China, and that must not happen. Europe has a lot to offer, and it also has a lot to lose. So those are my reservations about these approaches. Directionally right, but much too slow, and not tackling the root cause of scalability in Europe. Entrepreneurs think about scaling. And unless we can help entrepreneurs scale throughout Europe and scale quickly, we will not be able to hold Europe will not be able to have a voice in the global digital economy.
That makes a lot of sense. And actually, you went already into a direction in which I want to drill a little further, right? My question would have been, where do we see such data marketplaces make a difference first, right? Is it Europe or the US? But let me explain. In Europe, as you know, right, we have this privacy perception, right? And the politics, our politicians, especially on the European Union level, they're pushing for the third way, right? And privacy assured data could kind of be the fundament for such a third way in the AI economy that is different to the American approach and that is different to the Chinese approach. So kind of the preconditions, they sound pretty good. But on the other hand, we see Apple just last week, right, announcing privacy settings that just show that they were the first ones to recognize, or they recognize very early, that privacy is a competitive advantage, right, that it's a USP. So it's coming out of the business world somehow, and they are now putting pressure on Facebook and Google to reconsider their business models. This is powerful, right? And I mean, to be honest, we also do see the most startups that we're seeing in that space are still coming from the US as well. It kind of made me a little wondering, right? But I think you mentioned it already by reflecting the scaling problems, right? But I was wondering if you have any other ideas to share on, what possibilities could we have here in Europe, or what are the advantages that we have in Europe in order to make something like this successful?
Yeah, look, there is commonality between Europe and the United States, and I do believe there is enough, as you call it, fundamental agreement on some principles that we could create a common transatlantic data market. Okay, and here is the commonality. So what Apple is doing is very much in line with the European sensibility around privacy, agency, respect for the individual. Okay, and it is a big winner for the company. Isn't that beautiful? Why can't something that's the right thing to do also be good for business, right? Especially a company that has done so much to transform our lives. And that is that if I safeguard privacy, I can create a trust. And that's, that, my friends, is the number one biggest and most valuable currency in life, short of time, which you cannot recycle or recreate, right? When the clock is up, the clock is up. But in terms of other currencies, trust is so much more valuable than any other sort of token or fiat currency, because it's very hard to get back. It's very hard to generate more of once you have misstepped, okay? There is very little forgiveness in people's minds. You need the trust to get to intimacy with the customer. If I know a company like Apple, or let's take a European company from a different sector, right? Let's say, of course, SAP, similar digital realm, but let's just say somebody like a Lufthansa, okay? Or Air France, or whoever. If I have trust because my customers know I will protect your data, dear customer, dear traveler, I will give you a voice in which data you want to give me and which data you want to trade and maybe sell to me. And if I have this more nuanced understanding of what data, what protections, what trust, then I can create intimacy. And with intimacy, I can create more service offerings, right? So there's one board member from a European company that told me, look, if I have more individualized privacy tools, I can then offer more individualized services to the traveler, even before they ever set foot into a train station or an airport or a harbor. Okay, so that is beautiful. Okay, and this is something that I think we do really well here in the United States. In Europe, you have lots of talent. Make no mistake about it. This is not a matter of digital talent. It is not a matter of entrepreneurial talent. It's a matter of experimentation, the ability to fail in a way that avoids the big catastrophe, but doesn't take the risk out for the entrepreneur. Conversely, we need new legislation in Europe that allows people to win big when they win, okay? We still haven't understood that an entrepreneur is an essential change agent for society to adapt for the cognitive era. So we need to empower them to risk a lot, but also win a lot. And that gets me to capital. We have still not broken the back of the capital needs in Europe. There's lots of money in Europe, but why is it that venture capitalists maybe fund to the order of magnitude of maybe a third of what their American or Chinese counterparts are funding? So when I pitch a venture, my first route is always to American venture capitalists. And so we need to enable much greater capital flow into risk capital in Europe. So now that we have said that, if that happens, the two are actually quite compatible. We need to have the privacy assured solutions from the United States and pair it with the regulatory, more customized regulatory safeguards in Europe. And then together, we can actually create a vast, if we include Canada, right, then we're getting close to 1 billion people across Europe and North America, okay? And that is now on the order of being able to, compete with the Chinese model through the rest of the world. And make no mistake about it, do not be blind to the Chinese model. It is incredibly dynamic, successful, and deserves our respect in that way. But it is also not compliant with our values. And so if we want a healthy data economy with lots of growth, lots of trading, okay, lots of entrepreneurship, we have to make sure that we jointly, the United States and Europe, can promulgate that human respecting data market model through the rest of the world. Otherwise, we're going to fizzle out in very tedious, very granular type engineering while China runs away with the global digital economy, right? So that would be my message.
Yeah, that makes, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, it fits very well to one of the questions from the audience, right, which touches upon the geopolitical aspects of the data and AI economy. And I mean, to be honest, right, we have seen it over the last 2-3 years. Almost every country has come up with an AI strategy, and hence now we're talking about the new Cold War or whatever else. So there is whether or not we like it, there's a geopolitical thing to AI and data. Now the question hence is very valid, and it's the question: if we make data scarce and if we come up with a data marketplace, wouldn't that be kind of the play ball of geopolitical forces, right? Because you would control an essential asset of something that is underpinning lots of economic transactions. So wouldn't you see the data marketplaces would be running into confrontation on a political level, geopolitical level?
Well, so, we don't know exactly how it's going to pan out, right? But there's two potential paths. One is, yes, you're right, Tobias, right, that if we create a common data market between the United States or between North America and Europe, then that stands in direct contrast to how the Chinese, more state-mandated and state-supervised model works when it comes to data. However, I think there is also no real data market in China and through the Belt and Road just yet. So, I don't know if they're working on something, but frankly, right now it's all about in China, it's all about making sure that data stays in the silos, yes, vertically integrated, okay, but the silos of each global platform or each digital platform in China, okay? And, of course, with direct access for the government, okay? So, but there isn't sort of an alternative market design for people to flow their data in. Once people around the world see, look, I can trade some data and I can be safe, I can make a little money on the side, I still get digital services, business models get adjusted. Why wouldn't you go for that rather than the model that says it's all staying within the Chinese company and then accessible by the Chinese government? I don't understand. That's a math that is fairly obvious, right? Now, there's another way this could go, Tobias, and I know you and I have studied this, right? Which is, this doesn't have to be necessarily a central authority that is sort of transatlantic versus China, okay? And I have to say very clearly that as much as I disagree with China's handling of itself in the Belt and Road and with surveillance, etc., I do want to pay respect to the fact that China has lifted, 500, 600 million people out of poverty over the last 40 years. Okay, it's a big success in economic terms. Of course, 30 million or so dead is a very heavy price to pay. It is not for me to criticize the economic development model, but it's not a model that I think, transatlantically we want to live. But the alternative here is a decentralized model of trading places, right? Where DeFi 2.0 might say, instead of having one New York Stock Exchange or Frankfurt Stock Exchange that is transatlantic, why can't we have trading places that are dispersed, diffused, and all governed by an oversight body, but not a centralized marketplace, right? It's driven by new generations of blockchain, new ways of tokenizing, and there could be, a couple of hundred trading places around the world, as long as they submit to certain legal, ethical safeguards. So that then takes the whole, Cold War 2.0 rhetoric out of it, because it's not just America versus China. I don't think that rhetoric, that moniker, that label of Cold War 2.0 is that desirable, right? So that could be an interesting path.
Yeah, unfortunately, there would be so many more things we should talk about against this background. However, we are coming to the end. Thus, let me ask you a final question here, a short one. Your brief thoughts on that. We started talking about trust and competitiveness, both were being both deteriorating currently in the AI economy. Now we talked about the potential of data marketplaces. When do you think we will see them scale out? What do you think, when will we see them not to be small startups, but actually make a huge difference? How long will it take?
So I think we are going to see the Biden administration take some courageous steps when it comes to governing at least the American, the US-based digital and data economy. We have to see how this works out. I sure hope they are going to create a good balance. And for the record, I'm not unbiased, as I served on the Biden-Harris Innovation Policy Committee during the campaign, however briefly. So knock on wood, I sure hope that they're going to get this right, because that then is, that's a big, reasonably homogeneous market in economic terms, not in cultural terms. And if the two sides then can in parallel talk about a joint market and maybe fine-tuning the GDPR so that it works for American needs, then we might see the rise of a data market over the next 4 to 8 years. I'm impatient. I'm an entrepreneur as well. I'm not just a professor, but an entrepreneur, as you know. So I always want to say, we need this the next sort of 0 to 4 years. But realistically, I would say 4 to 8 years is when we're going to see it. But see, we have to get in now. We have to prepare now. We have to clean up data. We have to develop governance mechanisms. We have to make sure that we train our people to understand data culture and how to think about, what data is okay to give away and what data is not okay to give away. So there needs to be a whole range of education programs for which we need not just regulation and policy, but also entrepreneurs to lean in. So we actually need the lead time in order to get ready for this market. But it is definitely something that will be happening in some shade. So let's start designing, let's start dialoguing, let's start preparing so that we're ready when the time comes.
Thank you so much, Olaf. This call for action are also pretty fine final words. Thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, the show is already over. However, you will find the recordings of the show on YouTube and on Telegram. The links will be shared on both platforms. Thank you also to the audience for the questions. In particular, thanks to the team who has made it possible and to Blockchance in general. Please also make sure that you tune in next week. The guest next week is Irina of Pokal. And yeah, I wish you a very nice evening and thanks for listening in. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Blockchains. And thank you, everybody. Have a good day.